back. This is Breaking Down Security for, we're actually going to put a date on this one. This is October 5th. We recorded this, and just a week after DerbyCon. With me, as ever, is my faithful companion in the TARDIS of life, Mr. Boettcher.
What up?
Hey. So, we shook our green room out again, and we happened to find another guest in the cushions, Mr. Jarrod Frates. Welcome, Mr. Frates. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay, and don't want to embarrass you or anything, but last name is actually pronounced Frates.
Oh,
Probably should have touched on that beforehand. That's okay. Everybody messes it up.
Note to self.
I've got 40 years. I got 40 years of that being a slip, so I don't worry about it too much anymore.
Humper. Yeah, I did that with Georgia Weidman as well. I was like, oh, Georgia Weidman, and she's like, well, it's actually pronounced Weidman, and I was like, God.
Oh well, that means that I've been incorrect in pronouncing it when I've been recommending her book to other people, because I've been pronouncing it Weidman.
Okay.
But I will keep that in mind should I meet her and other times that I talk to her.
Yeah, it just stabs me in the face because my name is just awful with the pronunciation.
We don't do second takes here either.
No, we don't. We don't start over. We just keep trudging on up that hill. So.
All right, Mr. Brocky, let's go.
All right, Jarrod. So maybe because we're all relatively unknown in the information security field, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Your superhero origin story, if you will.
Well, at the moment, I'm a pen tester. I've been a pen tester for coming up on 2 years now on a formal basis. Before that, I had about 9 years in the defensive side, starting off with firewalls and expanding out to IDS, learning how to do incident response, and that was kind of where I was like, hey, these tools are pretty cool. I wonder how else I can use them. And thus started my roughly 6-year attempt to become an actual pen tester. But in the meantime, did networking and voice over IP and did a little bit of forensics and kind of touched on a lot where I was. The only thing that I didn't really quite get involved in was mobile device management.
Okay.
And that was largely because I had already gotten the job to be a pen tester, and it was like 2 months out, and I just didn't want to get involved in yet one more project. But before that, I came up, started off doing unofficial help desk, then became official help desk, and then started doing some server admin, worked in a colo, and then was able to get the job that eventually ended up being the security stuff. So I've kind of been all around the IT world.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that that's one of the skills that I bring, is that understanding of what everybody else is dealing with.
Okay. So you're very much a generalist, you believe, in the information security field?
There's a lot that I can do. Unfortunately I've forgotten how to do a few things. That occasionally I have to look them up, and was like, okay, wait, I used to know how to do this. Like, I'll be on a test and be like, okay, I used to know how to do this, but now I got to look it up because it's some arcane thing I haven't touched in a decade.
Yes, I totally understand. So we had Jarrod on. I don't know if some of you noticed, but DerbyCon was last week, and Jarrod went to DerbyCon, and Mr. Boettcher went to DerbyCon, and I was stuck here doing a video on PGP and GPG, which actually is pretty well received, surprisingly. So I just wanted to start out by finding out your thoughts this year's DerbyCon. Did y'all didn't go to the same talks, obviously, so maybe you can discuss between the two of you different talks you went to and what you liked about them.
Yeah, we actually did, I think, end up in 2 or 3 of the same talks, just not really knowingly. We talk about it afterwards. It's like, oh yeah, I was in that one too.
Right.
So I went last year and this year. I think I got a little more out of it this year because I was kind of less paranoid that I was, this unknown, and walking in I was going to be isolated. But DerbyCon is really a very, it's a very small conference. I think they said there was like 1,982 people who actually showed up and checked in. Much smaller than RSA and DEF CON and so forth. And but I was also able to enjoy them this year, and there were some really interesting ones. There was the silver ticket, which is basically using the Microsoft Kerberos authentication to do password cracking against service accounts, or actually, I think against pretty much any account you want, without having any sort of domain access or domain admin access, I should say. You have to be authenticated somewhere on the domain. What else was there? You know what? I'm kind of blanking on what the other two were.
I went to, I think one of my most interesting talks was where a guy built an environment, and then, like a fake business, and then he would execute malware that he had received through his legitimate business inside that environment to see what happened, who it called out to and all that, and what they downloaded. And I think he's going to release that October the 25th, something like that, where you can build that environment yourself. He'll give you all the tools that you need. It goes out, it searches Google for the type of business that you want, downloads as many files as it can related to that business, and just throws them out there on all your fake desktops, and sees what the infiltrators are going to look at. And basically they download documents to get to do some recon on your environment. And he said he actually put some malware there himself, and they downloaded and executed on their command and control box. So he was able to hack back, so to speak. I thought it was very interesting. It's something that I would like to try once he releases it. Very nice.
It's a little bit of a further twist on the offensive security, or not the offensive security, but the
active defense.
Yeah, the active defense.
Yeah.
Basically, what I plan on doing is if I get some sort of phishing email, take that into the environment, go to the URL that's displayed in the email and see what happens.
That's cool. Yeah, I think that'll be fun to try. Was there a lot of overhead? Did you need several VMs, or was it just one VM
I
to
think
rule
it's
them all?
I think it's several VMs where you have an isolated network, and of course you have to simulate a legitimate business, right? So you have to have a bunch of desktops, you have to have a database, maybe an application server, whatever there is, or maybe just an array of workstations. Because typically someone clicks a link, they're in a group of either support personnel, development, whatever, people working for the company, call centers, you name it.
Yeah, malware propagates, so you have to have multiple hosts to be able to, simulate the propagation.
Yeah, and he may have a SharePoint server there just for the hell of it, just to make it look realistic.
Okay.
So I'm really interested in that once it comes out.
All right.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges in building out an effective lab, is figuring out what exactly you're going to run, and then even once you have it up, okay, now what do I do with it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because if you're running any kind of Windows at all, you're like, okay, I need an AD server. Okay, do I want to run DHCP on the AD server? Do I want to let Linux run the DHCP server? You've got that. You have to have the bare, infrastructure if you're going to run any kind of network like that.
It's all that boring prep work, and he kind of automates it by going out and getting documents. Like if he mentioned a Taiwanese company being attacked, well, he would go, do a Google search, and it was automatic for any documents relating to that company. He would download PDFs, Excel documents, Word documents, and just spray them out all over his environment.
Okay. All right.
So he's basically seeding the environment with real stuff.
Yes, real stuff he downloaded and seeding it. In things like My Documents, desktop, places where they normally be.
Sure.
Okay, that's not something that I had ever considered really doing with my lab before. I'm going to have to add that in.
What's your lab look like at home?
My lab at the moment is scattered. Since buying a new house, not everything is connected because the network's not complete. That's not going to happen until the temperatures finish cooling off a bit, because I need to actually wire some stuff through the attic. And living in Dallas, it gets a little warm up there sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And even now, with the outside temperatures in the 60s and 70s, it's still hanging around in the 80s up there. So I need to wait a little bit before before I run the rest of the cables. But other than that, I mean, I spin up VMs on a pretty regular basis. Often enough that I sometimes have to go in and look at them. I have no idea what I was doing with this one, and I have no notes on it, so I just blow it away. I haven't regretted one since or yet, but it's at some point I'm going to do that. I'm going to nix something and regret it. So I'm trying to go back and keep some notes on each one that I do. But I mean, I've got Windows 2000. I have archives of 95 and OSR 1 and OSR 2. Can't find the rare OSR 3 ISO anywhere. But I've got 98 SE, ME. I keep all of them around. I used to do it just for tech support because I knew so many people who had them, but eventually it was like, well, let's tinker with these and let's see what else we can do with them.
Yeah. You ever find the older like 98 and ME in engagements?
I found a 98 box once, but it wasn't connected to the domain. And it wasn't really doing anything, and it was scheduled to be removed like a week and a half later.
Oh, okay.
And they actually notified me ahead of time. They said, hey, you're going to find this, but we're in the process of setting up the replacement system.
Okay.
So that, it was kind of cool to see it. It was like, hey, but A, most of the tools don't work on it anymore. I mean, you can go out and you can find the old stuff that'll work on it, but B, there just wasn't really much value on it. They had very few files. I think they kept it around for like an old version of software that connected to a local printer type device.
Okay.
And they would just bring the files over on floppy. And
wow.
Nice. Hey, there's an obscure thought. What if I had something critical and I just put it on Windows 95? I mean, there's no, hacks. I mean, nobody's looking for a Windows 95 box, right?
I wouldn't connect it to the internet, but I suppose you could try that.
Just kind of obscure.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody actually looks at the A and B drives anymore.
Yes, the B drive.
Yes.
Yes, that brings back very, very painful memories. Dual floppies and what have you. So
back when you had a 3.5 and a 5 1/4 inch drive.
Exactly. And you were archiving to the 3.5 because the 5 1/4 only holds 720K of data. So, oh my God.
Right. So
yeah, we could reminisce for hours, I'm sure.
Yes.
So, hey, there was one other talk that is not something that I'm going to be using on a regular basis on a pen test, but it was really interesting, and it was about 3270 emulation hacking, and that one was done by Dominic White, and he did some looking at the 3270, the traffic that was going back and forth, and he found that the fields that get displayed, they have these flags on them, and the flags include things like whether they're protected, which means they're user editable, or if they're hidden or they show, or they're blanked out, like for a password field, stuff like that. But what he found was that these are only instructions to the client, that they're sort of like requests to the client on how to do it. If you ignore the fields, you can actually display everything. Not only that, you can do things like change them and then resubmit them to the server, and the server trusts it.
So for our listeners out there and myself, because I was totally lost, the 3270 is a terminal emulator?
Oh, yeah, so sorry. The 3270 is TN3270 is the protocol that's used when you're connecting to the old green screen setups on mainframes.
Okay.
So like if you have if you're familiar with Rumba, then it's software along those lines. And what Dominic found was that by and large the mainframe trusts everything that the client sends it.
Really?
Yes, which, you would figure, hey, this is IBM. They've been doing this for 40 plus years. They would know this is a bad idea. I mean, we've known this in the web world for 20 years, that you don't trust anything that the client sends you.
Yeah.
But he was able to do things like jump into admin screens that he wasn't supposed to have access to just because he changed a field.
Okay.
Now, what kind of I know there's a lot of government clients, at least, using mainframes, and some actually prefer mainframes today. I mean, that's a lot of systems out there running mainframes.
Yeah, there are
critical systems.
Yes, and some of them are running software that is 20, 30, 40 years old. Literally. I mean, that he's run into cases where he's found bugs in applications and said, okay, so I found this bug and you need to get this fixed. And they said, well, we can't fix it. And he's like, okay, well, so is the developer like out of business? Or no, the developer's dead.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He died in the 90s.
Wow.
And not like, in a car accident, he died of old age.
Yeah.
So so this is kind of a running problem within that world. But this is specifically, he was working in System Z because he didn't have access to like AS400 and stuff. But he says that theoretically, there's no reason that a lot of the stuff shouldn't work on the AS400 and the other mainframe systems that use the 3270.
It's interesting. The at first it was SCADA, because SCADA was built to last 20 or 30 years with that software load without really being updated. But mainframes is always kind of the one place that InfoSec really has yet to go, because there aren't a lot of people in InfoSec who understand how mainframes work, or I think if we kicked over that particular rock, we would find that it's a pretty nasty underbelly there that would show a lot of promise with regard to security vulnerabilities that we need to suss out and fix, and that we'll find that mainframes aren't perfect.
Well, Mr. Boettcher there got to a point that there are a lot of environments that rely very, very heavily on the mainframes. Oh, yeah. If you're using software that can't be patched because the person that wrote it is no longer, has shuffled off the mortal coil, then that puts you into a very dicey position where either you rewrite for a new platform, which is horrifically expensive in many cases, or you just continue and you keep your support contract, and if it's working, yeah, okay. It's not like IBM's not supporting this. They've got new versions of the software still coming out. Yeah. You can still buy brand new System Z hardware. Yep. They come up with a new power chip every few years to add in.
Wow.
And but one of the problems is that nobody wants to kick the tires on these things because everybody's so afraid that if they knock over the mainframe, they're going to completely destroy the business.
That is true.
And I'll admit it. If I see a mainframe on a pen test, I'm a little iffy. I tend to kind of tiptoe around it. But at the same time, IBM may not have gotten the whole "don't trust the client" thing, but they got stability pretty well down.
Yeah,
it is pretty hard to knock over a mainframe, and Dominic says he hasn't been able to do one yet. He's been beating up on these applications for a couple of years.
Okay, maybe we'll that's somebody we'll have to have on to the podcast to discuss about mainframes.
Yeah.
So I know there's people or businesses today that are debating whether or not to get a mainframe just because they're so stable and reliable. And then you run into problems like you mentioned.
Yep.
Yeah.
So is a lot of the DerbyCon talks are on Iron Geek's website, which we'll put a link in the show notes to.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see if they can get that talk up, or if that talk's already up as of
that one was up by Monday.
Oh, okay.
I think, or at the latest by Tuesday, but it is up. I went back and I was looking through a few things after I think it was Mr. Boettcher that was telling me about the Jason Street one.
Okay.
Where he had things to say about this industry.
Yes, I heard it get quite passionate at one point.
That would be a good word to use.
Yeah. Did you go listen to it, Jarrod?
I did. Yeah. I did, and I was really afraid because, I think it was on Tuesday, Iron Geek was putting up on Twitter saying, does anybody know where this recording is? I can't find it.
Yeah, he was looking for it quite a bit, and he had actually ended up finding it on another hard drive or something. Thankfully, Adrian does a bang up job of getting us videos from not just DerbyCon but other cons as well. So
his
he
talk
does
was
14
about
cons a year.
Just so everyone knows, his talk was about one of his points was, why do hackers get 10, 15 years in prison when murderers, rapists, and he gave examples, get probation to 3 years sometimes. There's just people are still scared of the word hacker, and it's an unknown, so they tend to give harsh sentences to hackers, whereas they could relate to murderers, rapists, and things, because that's more prevalent in society.
Yeah. So, Jarrod, you said you had gone to last year's DerbyCon. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about if there were any differences between last year's con and this year's con. Did you see a difference in mentality, or where there were less feds there? If there were, the caliber of the talks were better last year than this year? I just thought maybe you could give us a little critique of the differences you saw between last year and this year.
The main thing was it was easier to get into talks this year. They cut down the number of people. Last year they had 2,300 people showed up, and in the closing talks, Dave Kennedy actually he asked the crowd, do you think it was maybe a little overcrowded this year? And everybody was kind of like, yeah, a little bit too many people. And so they actually cut it back. He said in the closing, he said in this year's closing talk that they had intended to only do 1,500 tickets, and it ended up being the 1,982, I think was the number that he cited, for people that showed up for other tickets and black badge holders and so forth. So it was definitely easier in general to get into the talks. Some of the talks were way overpacked, but that's just because when you have somebody like Jack Daniel talking, when you get somebody who's considered to be a superstar like that, you're going to get a lot more people in there.
Yeah.
And that's true of pretty much anywhere that you go. But they didn't really limit people. They really tried to get as many people in as they could. And I think for the Jack Daniel talk, I think they ended up getting almost everybody in. I ended up actually being next door. So, I figured on that one it was going to be packed, and I could go back and look at it later from Iron Geek's videos. But
right, same with me.
But there were a couple of them that some
that I knew were going to be too crowded. I went to the other talk, and I figured it would be on video later on.
Yeah, there was one that I went to. It wasn't one that I figured wasn't going to be on video, but it turned out that they didn't record it, which was it was a physical pen testing. All your base still belong to us. Physical pen testing, Tales from the Trenches. And they didn't record that because they said that the information that they were presenting was too sensitive and could actually identify some of their clients.
Oh, wow. So they didn't de-identify it properly.
No, they obfuscated it, but in explaining what the circumstances were around some of the pen tests and some of the lessons that they drew from it, they were concerned that it might be possible for somebody who was dedicated to pin down who the client was and potentially use some of their findings against them if they hadn't been remediated yet. So it was if you're there, great. If you're not, well, you kind of missed out. But it was a really interesting talk. The physical pen testing is one that I don't know that I will be doing anytime in the near future, because I get there's some anxiety that kicks in when somebody points a gun at me, even if it's a security guard. So I'm probably going to leave that to other people for quite some time.
Wow, there's a visual.
Yeah, I apologize to the audio. That's why somebody is always mowing our next door neighbor's lawn at about this time of day. So
we should record at like 11 p.m. Pacific time.
Yeah, or on Friday nights or earlier on Sundays. That might be a good idea, Mr. Boettcher.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we, since we're doing a kind of a weekend review, last week kind of thing, one of the vulnerabilities that I think everybody's been talking about has been the Shellshock vulnerability. And I think we would be remiss by not at least explaining exactly how the Shellshock vulnerability works. We're going to have a link to a really excellent forum post that I found on the Ubuntu forums of all things, where somebody asked the question, how does the Shellshock vulnerability work, and why is this such a big deal? And this was a 15 plus year old bug. So this has been in there since, I think I saw a tweet from Katie Masuris that all the way back to Bash 1.3, all the way up to the latest versions up until a few days ago, had this vulnerability.
Well, and they're still not completely sure that they found all of them. I mean, they've had 6 CVEs that have been issued just on this one on this one problem. Everybody has been looking at it so hard and finding these other little twists that have allowed it to that have allowed the attack to continue. So there's still people looking at it. I will not be at all surprised if some more CVEs come out on it.
Well, the problem is it dates back from the beginning of Linux. I mean, Bash was one of the, you have regular shell, and then you have the born again shell, which came out shortly after. But you've got a 15 plus year old code line with one guy who's the quote unquote maintainer, who's, I don't know if he's actually putting out regular patches or anything, but he's got no budget. He's got nobody looking at the code. Everybody just assumes that Bash is okay. And then all of a sudden you get one guy who goes, oh, look, I can do this. And then people start really, the many eyes that you keep talking about as a positive for open source software finally gets its, Sauron-like vision posted onto the code here. And then you start shaking it out and you find, all kinds of stuff like, the scripting or the coding format is not even in an updated version. So people are like, I don't even know how to read this. So you're having people go back through and actually changing it to a proper format so that everybody can read it. And then you've got, people like, wow, it's got hundreds of global variables, and you're not even supposed to do that in this day and age because, I'm beginning to think that, we're going to have I don't want to call it Libra Bash or whatever, but, we're going to have another fork of the Bash shell at some point in the future, because you've got one guy who's dealing with it, and it's not, he can only do so much.
I'm kind of wondering if we might not see one of the alternate shells come up. I know a few people who are huge fans of Z Shell.
Z Shell?
And yes, and which has a lot of really cool features to it. It's just not as well known, and there's not as much in the way of scripting code that's been written for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Bash may just continue at least as a secondary for quite some time. One of the problems that goes along with, even with doing trying to do a fully compatible rewrite is you risk breaking things.
Oh yeah.
Because you find a bad practice and you try to clean it up and you realize there's no way of cleaning it up without properly fixing it. And XKCD had a great one. I think it was sometime last year, where it was basically this one really corner case of somebody taking advantage of a bug in order for their script to work properly. And the bug gets fixed, and then he just goes in and complains and says, well, you should just put in a switch to enable the old functionality. And I guarantee there is somebody out there who is relying on some bug in Bash, and if we go in and fix it, it's going to tick him off. But that's kind of the penalty. Yeah,
people are using bugs as a way of doing business, because that's nobody's ever going to fix I would imagine somebody has used this the Shellshock vulnerability as a way of doing business perhaps, and they just didn't realize that it was actual vulnerability. So it was really excellent article, because I went through and I was like, okay, why are they putting a colon and then a semicolon inside the curly braces? What I found was that the colon is supposed to return nothing, like a zero, pretty much. It's like a function all by itself when you put a colon in there, which I did not realize. So this is a lot like a I don't know, it would be very similar to a SQL injection kind of thing, where you've got the initial query, and then you can break out of that and add additional things at the end.
Yeah, it's script injection is what it is. And but in concept, yes, SQL injection is very close to the concept of what's going on here.
Yeah. So as a pen tester, is this something you're going to use and put into your cap to pull out, in future? Because I think this is such a widespread vulnerability that not everybody has patched every box on their network. Or what's worse is they can't patch it. Like if they're running an OS that is no longer supported, like say somebody's running an old version of Red Hat.
We actually see this on a pretty regular basis. People are running like RHEL 3.
Yeah.
Which is no longer supported. I think support for it ended a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And we see this because they kind of figure, well, it's Linux and it's secure, or nobody attacks Linux. There's no exploits out there for it.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of stuff comes along periodically. We also run into cases where you have large environments and they have not implemented a proper monitoring system for all of their Linux servers. Mm-hmm. For all the flack that Microsoft catches over patch maintenance and being able to make sure that things are secure, they've actually made it pretty easy with SCCM, System Center Configuration Manager. And because they have done this and made it so easy to find out which systems actually have things and which don't, they can go back, or users rather, enterprise users can go back and figure out which ones they have to go and maintain on a manual basis. It's not quite so easy to do within the Linux world. There are tools out there for it.
Sure.
They're not nearly as widely deployed.
Yeah.
This begs the question in my mind. Okay, you have a lot of bugs coming out with this open source software. I don't know how they're discovered. I guess somebody actually takes the time to research what's going on under the covers. But I'm thinking that Linux day may come. Maybe there's some major flaw out there in the kernel that allows you to get root access. I mean, not just Bash, but with the core Linux itself. I mean, what are the odds of that taking place and everybody going, oh crap, every system that's running Linux or Unix or whatever is vulnerable to this, and you could get, completely owned, at any time.
It does happen still, especially with systems that are still running 2.6 base code. There's still actually quite a few of those out there. I think RHEL 5 and CentOS 5 are actually still on the 2.6 kernels. Mm-hmm. And there are still a number of bugs that are out there. There are a number of exploits that are out there for bugs that existed in those. Mostly they've been patched. The patches have been backported to the older versions. But, again, if you have somebody who hasn't rebooted their system in 3 or 4 years, and it does happen, that those exploits work. And if some level of shell access can be gained, get in there, either upload the file, or since Linux so often very helpfully includes GCC, get the source code on and compile it, and execute it, and then all of a sudden you've got root, sometimes through a timing exploit, sometimes because a function doesn't return things properly. It's something out there using printf instead of sprintf.
Yeah.
But those are getting fewer and farther between with the kernel. They've been going through and kind of making sure that new code that gets added in has been vetted by quite a few eyes, and it's not that security issues don't exist, it's just that they tend to be on a smaller scale now and more difficult to trigger. And you also have things like SE Linux that can help to prevent the wrong people from executing that kind of code.
Oh yeah, I know SE Linux. That's the thing I delete. That's the second thing I turn off right after I
You and about 70% of the rest of the world.
Yeah. It's a shame that it's kind of like it's like PGP. It's like nobody really knows how to make that work, and if they did, it would be it'd be a lot better, I think, in the long run if you were enabling SE Linux. But the first thing is you want it to be functional and then secure instead of secure and then functional, which we run up against quite a bit in enterprise. So you think this is just I hate to use words like tip of the iceberg or low-hanging fruit or whatever, but you think we're going to see more of the underpinning or the stuff that we take for granted in Linux and Unix being exploited? Like, you think grep will be the next, grep will have the next big bug, or sed or awk or something like that, which will allow us to, be totally owned on an even grander scale?
I can't really speculate on what might be next, I think with Heartbleed was kind of the big eye opener. The open source world has had its occasional big bugs in the past. MySQL had the root access bug a few years ago that was pretty trivial to do. Apache's had some problems here and there, but they tend to be these kind of like one-off, well, there's ways to prevent it from happening, even without patching it type of thing. But when you run into things like this, and with Heartbleed, I think it's really kind of opened things up that there's too much open source out there to do like a complete code review for everything. But we do need to go back and look at these larger scale implementations. We've got the Linux kernel everywhere, obviously. We have OpenSSL, and nobody was really providing any money for that up until recently. And now Google and several other companies have chipped in, and they're keeping like $10 million in for development to do a full top to bottom code review. There's the LibreSSL rewrite that's going on, and then now with Bash, I think the open source world is really starting to realize that yes, we do have these things that a lot of people are using, and we figure that since a lot of people are using them and sometimes even contributing patches, we're not really going back and reviewing them like we need to. But let's go look over at the TrueCrypt situation, the TrueCrypt audit. They raised a whole lot of money, and they've been prepping to do that code audit for several months now.
Yeah.
But they still haven't gotten started. And one reason is because even with that money, a lot of the people who are going to be doing the reviews still have day jobs.
Yeah.
And on top of that, code review takes a long time, and it's still not a guaranteed process. I like to say that we have a lot of people graduating and getting their masters and doctorates and doing all kinds of research and working their entire careers in the computer science field. And the reality of the situation is computing is not a science, it's an art. We have certain sciences to it, but then again, so does painting. Artists learn the chemistry of the paints that they use, or whatever medium they happen to be using. They learn all that, and there's a definite science to it, and they can use that science to improve what they're doing. But in the end, what they end up with, it's hard to look at it and say that this is perfect. There's always something that they look at, and I want to do even a masterpiece, even something that the world sees as a masterpiece. They might look back on it and go, well, I wish I would have done it this way instead. And we see that in computer sciences where, I wish I would have picked this language instead, or picked this compiler instead, or they realize that they were relying on a faulty platform or faulty premises. And it gets virtually impossible to work all this stuff out. And I think at best, we are decades away from being able to truly call it a science. I think more likely we're probably a couple of centuries away from being able to call it a science. The complexity is so far beyond anything that any one human can handle, and adding more people into it doesn't necessarily make it better. You end up with more eyes, and you end up with more opinions. It's like bringing together a bunch of experts to look at an art piece.
Yeah.
Half of them may think it's an absolute masterpiece and it's absolutely perfect, and the other half may have completely different set of opinions.
That's right. And all those people that said, "Oh, we need to move to Bash," I was like, we should stay with T-Shell. It's pretty cool.
T-Shell?
T-Shell.
Really?
Yeah. Hey, it's
What's
got
awesome
the auto
about
no-hup
T-Shell?
feature,
I need my history. I need to be able to hit the up arrow, and I need tab completion. So,
I worked on TC Shell for a while in a system that I couldn't use the arrow keys.
Oh, God.
Oh, nice. But
for whatever reason, I'm sorry. I was able to use the arrow keys. I wasn't able to use the home and end keys. That's what it was.
Oh, that's awful.
So
yeah.
I would have command lines that would be like 100, 150 characters long, and to go back to the beginning, I either had to do a copy and paste, hit Control-C and do a copy and paste, and modify it that way, or just hold down the arrow key until I got to the beginning. There are other shortcuts, I could just never remember them.
And that concludes part 1 of our interview with Jarrod Frates. We'll be back next week. We had part 2. We'll ask him about
how to make the transition from automated to manual pen testing when you're doing a pen test, and how to know, when you should start doing the manual pen test, as well as reporting and what you expect to get or give in terms of value to an organization who asks for a pen test. All right, so hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next week.